49,316 people reportedly committed suicide in the United States in 2023. That's 135 per day and about one every 11 minutes. First responders are 2 to 3 more times likely to commit suicide than the average population. And when it comes to veterans, I wasn't able to find any 2023 data yet. It hadn't been released. But for 2022, there were 6,407 veterans in the United States that committed suicide. So for 2022, that's approximately 18 per day. Throughout my life, I've often heard people mention suicide as irrational, or maybe it's just a temporary solution to a permanent problem. But we have to remember that the people that are experiencing this, they're not approaching it from a rational standpoint. That's not how they're thinking about these things. We have to remember that when people are depressed or experiencing depression, that they can't escape that. They're constantly feeling it. And in the previous episode, I talked about how it can feel like it's pulling you down. Well, people want that to end. So while someone who may not be experiencing that may look at it through the lens of irrationality, we have to be able to step outside of our own selves to try to view it from the standpoint that other people, the people that are suffering from this, are actually looking at it through, try to see it through their lens to understand it. Aside from depression, traumatic events increase our risks of having suicidal ideologies. Stressful life events, whether it's losing a job, losing a loved one, those certainly can increase the risk. All of this leads to hopelessness, and that's why the risk becomes increased. Anything that will cause someone to feel like there's no point in going forward, like there's truly no hope. That's what sets them at such a high risk. Social isolation also increases the risk, and the irony of most of the things I just mentioned is they will lead people to isolation. People will naturally isolate from other people. They'll withdraw from their friends, from their family, from society, and it becomes this like loop, right? So I'm depressed, so I don't feel like going to that social activity. I don't feel like talking on the phone today. I don't feel like responding to that text message. I naturally start to isolate, which perpetuates the depression, which might make me isolate even more. It just keeps getting worse and worse unless something or someone intervenes or the person becomes aware enough to do something about it or have the strength to do something about it. There's also the stigma that will fight all of that. So the stigma of asking for help, seeking help, right? So if I feel like I can't ask for help, I'm already isolating, which is increasing my depression, but I have that mentality of I can't talk to anybody. I can't bring this up. I'm not supposed to talk about this. Whatever the stigma is that's in that person's brain, it's preventing them from actively seeking help. And then suicide can be planted in someone's brain. It can start as a small idea. And I'm going to use an analogy. I didn't make it up. I've heard it somewhere. Suicidal thoughts begin like a snowball. So at first, the thought may just pop into your head. And it's manageable because it's just this small little snowball, right? Like it hardly weighs anything. If I start rolling this snowball down the hill in this analogy, the snowball rolling represents the thought of suicide. I can stop it. It's not difficult to stop it. So I just had that thought. Doesn't mean I'm going to kill myself. I just thought of suicide. But if you continue to allow that snowball to roll, that's where it becomes dangerous, because over days, over weeks, maybe months, maybe years, the longer that snowball continues to roll, the bigger it gets. And eventually, you no longer have control and you can't stop it if you wanted to. It essentially turns into an avalanche. Let's talk about what leads people to hopelessness. Depression literally alters brain chemistry. It can change our thought patterns. I'm going to tie into spiritual warfare in the next episode on how those suicidal thoughts can be planted into our brains and why hopelessness sets in. But it essentially, when our brain chemistry is altered that way and our thought patterns are disrupted, it can make the future seem bleak and meaningless. PTSD and anxiety can also distort the perception of reality for us. The feeling that nothing will ever get better, even if that's not objectively true. Once again, I believe that's spiritual warfare, that those thoughts start getting planted in our head. But that's what essentially goes on. Isolation, which in itself, as I mentioned, is an infinite loop, that will also encourage and breed hopelessness within you. You feel alone, you feel misunderstood, you feel like you're a burden. And all of that erodes at your sense of self-value. Once again, that stigma and that perception that we shouldn't talk about it. No one wants to hear about it. Keep it to yourself. That ultimately just reinforces the lie that nobody cares, which makes it feel like there's just no point in speaking up. We can also experience a loss of purpose or direction, which will inevitably perpetuate hopelessness. When someone's identity is challenged or lost, like let's think of a career or a relationship, if that's a big part of your identity and you lose that or it's challenged, life may suddenly feel like there's just no meaning. And that's why it's important to have social circles outside of work and relationships, which is sometimes hard to do. I don't like to naturally do it. I'm very introverted, but it's for this reason, because as soon as you lose that identity, who are you if that's all you have? So we'll use police work, for example, because I know this has happened to a lot of people throughout history. If your career, if being a police officer is a huge part of your identity and you suddenly can no longer do that job, whether it's an injury, illness, whether it's because of personal reasons, maybe you willingly step down for your family, but it was such a big part of your identity and you've now suddenly lost it, you can see how dangerous that can be and how that can destroy somebody. And then how the devil will sneak in and start planting thoughts in your brain, ideas of suicide, that hopelessness. First, he'll plant the hopelessness to lead you to those thoughts. Sometimes success in itself can lead to hopelessness, because if we achieve something and it doesn't fulfill a deeper emotional or spiritual need, that can lead to hopelessness. So if you've been aspiring to reach some goal, and I'm not saying it's just for vanity, maybe it is, but I'm not saying that it is, but if there's not like a core need that is fulfilling emotionally or spiritually, that is why sometimes when you reach your aspirations, you get there and you're like, well, what now? This doesn't feel like I thought it would. This didn't provide me with what I was seeking. And maybe you don't think of it in those exact words, but you know what I'm talking about. You felt it before, and that's why. Because if our identity or our goals are focused at the superficial level, it's ultimately going to lead to hopelessness. Another big one that can lead to hopelessness are cognitive distortions, which are essentially negative thought patterns, automatic negative thinking. Everybody has them to a certain extent, and they warp our perception of ourselves and reality. They feed off of your insecurities. A common one, if you're thinking, I don't even know what this guy's talking about right now, I don't have those. If you've ever just stopped and said, man, I'm stupid, even if you say it almost out of jest or not fully getting angry at yourself, that is still what I'm talking about. We tell ourselves these things over and over and over again. It's just an automatic thought, like, oh, I'm stupid, oh, I'm ugly, oh, I'm weak. And for a lot of people, that's not the end of the world. We all do have them, but for most people, or at least some people, it may not have the negative effect or lead to hopelessness like I'm talking about. But it's very dangerous for someone who's battling depression, anxiety, maybe PTSD. Think of them as mental filters, biased ways of thinking, okay? They cause you to interpret things negatively and or inaccurately, usually both. There's a good analogy I've heard before. Think of looking through a pair of glasses, but the lens is cracked. So you can see everything, but everything that you're looking at, your vision is distorted. Okay? And oftentimes when we talk about negative distortions, we're emphasizing the negative side of things and completely ignoring the positive. Okay? It also leads to jumping to conclusions without any evidence. Some of the common ones, there's the all or nothing mentality. I'm a failure. Basically looking at things through a black and white lens. So if I fail at this one task, if I don't achieve my goal, if I'm going to the gym today and I'm saying, today I'm setting a PR on deadlifts. I'm not going to tell you what my PR is. It's pretty pathetic. See? Negative distortion. But if I go to the gym and I don't reach my goal today, and then I beat myself up over it, I'm a failure. It's just a small example. But that is very black or white. Instead of looking at the positive of how much work I've put into, how much I've gained in deadlifts over the last couple months, there's always a positive spin on things. And if you're only focusing on the negative and never, ever balancing that out with the positive, you can see how that would lead to hopelessness. Overgeneralization. Nothing ever goes right. So you're taking one negative event and just assuming it's always going to be that way. So you went to work today. Maybe it's the first day doing this new system at work or this new task and it fails miserably. Now you're just assuming everything's always going to be that way. Mental filtering. I'm an idiot because you messed up one word when you're speaking to somebody. Filtering out those positive aspects and just focusing on the negative. And the funny thing about those are usually the other people don't even notice them. So when we feed it our own insecurities and we overthink about stuff like that, we notice those imperfections. We notice those little mistakes, but most other people don't notice them at all. I can use canine training for an example. I remember a few years ago, there was a new handler in the class with me. We were both training fresh dogs, and I saw that handler sit down after they got up to do their training run with their dog, and they were really, really frustrated with themselves. They were trying to hide it, but I could tell that they were very upset and beating themselves up over the fact that the training run didn't go as well as they had wanted to, and I could tell they felt embarrassed. I could just read that in their face. So I pulled them aside and I said, look, no one's even paying attention. When you're out there on that field, we're all talking to ourselves. Like, think about it. When I'm on the field, are you watching me? No, you're having a conversation. You're looking at your phone. You're checking Instagram. You feel like everybody's watching you, but nobody cares. And even if someone does glance up, they're not catching those little mistakes that you are focusing on, because that leads to the next one, disqualifying the positive. They only said I did well because they felt sorry for me. Rejecting the positive experiences by insisting they don't count, right? So in that example of the canine training, let's say everybody was watching and they saw the one mistake that you made or that the dog made because of the mistake you made. You're discounting the fact that you may have done everything else great. Just because you screwed up one time or had one mistake doesn't erase all the good things you just did on that training run. It doesn't mean that that dog is worthless. It doesn't mean that you're a failure as a handler. And you can apply this. I know not everybody watching this is a dog handler, but you can apply this to some situation in your life. Jumping to conclusions. They must think I'm stupid. You're making negative assumptions without evidence. They must think I'm a terrible canine handler. Once again, no one said that. You just let your insecurities of the fact that you made a mistake that you're focusing on because you're disqualifying the positive, you're jumping to the conclusion that everybody else who is watching or probably was not watching thinks you're terrible. Emotional reasoning. I feel worthless, so I must be. People do this all the time. And maybe not in that example, but people assume feelings are facts all the time, and not just with negative distortions. I'm sure everybody's heard facts don't care about your feelings, right? Well, that can be applied here as well. So if you feel worthless, if you feel stupid, if you feel weak, facts don't care. It doesn't mean you are those things. But you need to be self-aware enough to realize that you're doing that you're letting your emotions tell you what facts are. Should statements. That's another big one. I should be strong enough to not feel this way, maybe would be a good example. But you're placing rigid rules on yourself or others. So for the canine example, I should be a better handler. I shouldn't make those mistakes. I should know how to control my dog or how to teach my dog better. And then there's the personalization. It's my fault others are upset with me. This one may not apply so much to the canine example, but think of it like when you take responsibility for things that are outside of your control. People often do this with their interactions with other people. So if someone else is experiencing something, you will personalize it and somehow make it your responsibility or your fault, even though you had no control over it whatsoever. So we can see why cognitive distortions are bad. They're dangerous for people with depression, dangerous for people with PTSD or anxiety. They focus solely on the negative side of things. They promote self-blame. They promote shame. All of this encourages inaction and creates hopelessness, like we've been talking about. And hopelessness can lead to suicidal ideations. The good news, though, is I keep mentioning being self-aware. Once you identify them, you can start to challenge those thoughts and replace them with balanced thoughts. And I would encourage you, if you feel like you're one of those people that is experiencing like negative distortions at a high level, it may be worthwhile looking into cognitive behavioral therapy. That may be beneficial for you. So if you have a therapist or you seek a therapist out, I would ask them about that and see if they think that's something that you would benefit from. And maybe they can steer you in the right direction for it. Another big one that leads to hopelessness would be spiritual despair. And I've kind of already intertwined the spiritual side and the spiritual aspect of this into some of the other examples. But when people struggle with faith or they feel abandoned by God, they can experience an existential hopelessness, wondering if there's anything that matters at all. And for the next episode, I'm going to go into spiritual warfare. That's going to be the main topic for next week. But you can see how spiritual despair in itself can lead to hopelessness. But the good news is hope, it can be rebuilt. Once you start identifying some of these things and you realize how hopeless you're feeling, you can start to rebuild it. It can take time, and it's not going to happen quickly, or at least it may not happen quickly. But the important thing is to know that you're not alone. There's a lot of people out there that are experiencing the same thing, the same emotions, the same level of depression. Yeah, their circumstances might be different that led them there, but there's a lot of people battling the same stuff. And there's other people that have come back from the edge of suicide. You're not alone. Healing is possible, and even if it doesn't feel that way right now, it is. And eventually, hopelessness will lose its grip on you. Today we're going to end the episode with the Bible verse of 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 8 through 10. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die. But as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God, who raises the dead. And he did rescue us.